Hello, and welcome back. I'm Carey with Devil May Care, and this is another episode of Level 2 Sewing. Since we're a little higher level now, a little more advanced than simply putting a pattern together, I would like to show you some basic alteration, because altering garments is something we all have to deal with at some point when we're making costumes on a budget or on a deadline. Now, I'm starting with just about one of the easiest, cheapest pieces of clothing you could possibly find. That's right, a t-shirt. We can find these all over the place for very, very cheap. That makes this one of the most cost-effective garments to use for costuming purposes. And I will show you how to turn it into something. What we're going to do is make a base tunic, a fitted tunic. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to make it fitted, because this is basically just a big square thing that you can put on and it'll fit just about everybody within a particular size range, some bigger, some smaller. It'll stretch, so it'll fit people even bigger than perhaps its measurements should call for. I mean, it's a wonderful, beautiful, magic piece of clothing. And I'm going to show you how to make it look like something different. Something that's not tubular, something that's not one size fits all, and something that will, what's the word I'm looking for? Complement your particular figure, whatever that may be, because this is just a big square. We can shape it however we want. We can shape it for a lady, we can shape it for a man, we can shape it for somebody that might be something a little bit in between. Whatever. I'm going to show you how that works. First thing we've got to do is take in these side seams, and one of the easiest ways to do that will be with measurements. So, remember how to take measurements? If not, go back and check out that episode real quick. It should be fairly easy to find, and come right back. Now, something that you will notice about this t-shirt probably right away is a problem that most t-shirts you buy anywhere are going to have. They've got designs on them, they've got patterns on them, they've got pictures on them, and you're not necessarily going to want that. If you're going to turn this into a, say, maybe a link tunic, or some kind of, I don't know, Marvel girl, or whoever Jean Grey was in her early career, into her dress, you can't have the little stuff on there. But the really cool thing is that that design does not go all the way through. So we're going to use the inside. Because if you remember my discussion about the right side and wrong side of fabric, that there's an obvious pretty side and an obvious ugly side, well, this is just a cotton knit, and it has no right side or wrong side. So you can use either side you want. So what we're going to do is have it right side out while we're stitching it and sewing it, and we're going to sew all of our seams with this side being out, which means it will become the inside of our finished garment. Sneaky, right? Take a moment to think about that, because that's pretty deep. Here we have the shirt, and remember, keep it turned right side out. The waist that I'm going to be working with is 14 inches down. That's how far down the natural waist that I took measurements on sits. And that waist was 34.5 inches. And what you do now is you divide that in half. Okay? So 34.5 divided in half is going to be 15, 16, 17 and a quarter. Sounds about right. And try to center it up to the middle of the shirt. Now this would be just for taking out the side seams. What I'm going to actually do is take out some darts as well. So I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger than I actually need it. I'm going to take it out to 20 inches, and that will give me room to take out a little bit more to make the darts. And darts do amazing things for creating curvature. And I will show you what I mean by that. So now we have our marks set, and what we're going to do with those marks is, this is the innermost point of what will become a curve. Since I'm making this for a female form, we want a curve that comes in and then goes right back out. A male form will, generally speaking, want a angle coming in like this, and then maybe just a slight curve at the bottom. Just because that's how most men are shaped versus how most women are shaped. Of course, if your shape varies from that rubric a little bit, by all means, take that into account. Don't try to force yourself into a shape that isn't natural, because that's uncomfortable and ultimately will not look as good as you will look when you take your own shape into account and work with it properly. I personally am of the belief that any shape can be beautiful as long as it is respected and acknowledged for what it is. Okay, now, so we have this curve coming in and going right back out like that. Now it's just a matter of stitching it, and make sure you do the same thing on both sides. And when you're getting this side ready for sewing, ready for making that curve in the side, or whatever shaping, whether it's a curved line or a straight angled line, you really want to make sure that it is lying totally flat, because you'll see there's not actually a side seam in a t-shirt. Most t-shirts don't have a side seam. So as you lay it out flat, it'll try to buckle and twist and do all sorts of weird stuff. And you've got to make sure this is laying flat, because otherwise it will throw off the final, ooh, watch out, pen. It will throw off that final curve that you make. It'll make it bunch and twist and do weird stuff. And you see I am pinning it to go take the curve right on up to this sleeve. I'm not actually changing the shape or size of the sleeve, just the body. So I'm continuing this seam right here, and that's actually something that we probably should do, is continue this right on up the edge of the sleeve, because this, when we turn it inside out, is going to be a seam on the outside, and that will be ugly, and we don't want that. We want the seams on the inside. So we'll just, right next to that line of stitching, immediately next to it. You don't have to change the shape of the sleeve unless you just want to. If you want it to be a little more tailored, a little more fitted, then by all means, bring it on up in here, whatever shape you want it to have. But for my purposes, I'm just going to follow the seam that's already there. All right, I have got my stitch length set to 3. And I'm just going to use the zigzag foot, because that's easy enough to do the whole thing. I'm going to set it pretty close to the edge and keep the needle in the center. Straight stitch, no width. Here we go. And keep it straight, keep it flat. Take your time. This is somewhat stretchy material, and it is going to try and stretch on you. And finish off the stitching. Now, because we're not continuing this side seam all the way down, I'm just going to let it be what it is. What we have to do is finish this the same way you would finish a dart, which means give it a fair amount of thread, just a nice long tail, and then you take both of these threads that we have and tie them in a square knot. And that is how you finish off a dart. And in this case, this particular seam. I will show you what a dart is in a moment, but it's basically just a seam that goes from an interior point of a piece of fabric to another interior point. It does not go all the way from one end to the other. And there we have our inside seam. And the last thing we're going to do with this particular seam is trim it out. Because once you put it on, this fabric that's in here is still going to try and hold its original shape. So we have got to cut this out, and then once we get it cut out, we will have to clip it along the curve the same way we did for the arm's eye and some of the other edges in the shirt. That way it will curve around the body like it's supposed to. And I'm keeping this cut line about maybe 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch away from the line of stitching. Now, I might be inclined to finish this on a serger. I haven't shown you how to use a serger or serging machine at this point, so I'm not going to do that with this particular project because you may or may not have one of those available. So I'm not going to tax you with that extra information. But there we are, and when we turn it inside out, there we have our nice finished seam. Next, the darts. All right, now, next we have to find the placement and the size of our darts. And you remember we're making a 34.5 inch waist, and at this point, our waist is about 41. We have a 41 inch waist on this soon-to-be tunic at this point. And that's a really easy way of figuring out what the measurements of something are when you only have 2 pieces, and in this case, we have 2 pieces, a front and a back. You take the measurement across the area that corresponds to the part of the body that you've measured. In this case, this narrowest part is corresponding to the waist. You measure it across that point of the pattern piece and multiply it by 2. Now that math does get a little more complicated when you start getting into more pieces. If you have a left front, left back, right front, right back, when you have 4 pieces or more pieces or oddly shaped pieces, then the math changes. But when it's simple like that, that's how you figure it out. So if we're at 41, we need to take it down by another, take it down by 7 inches. And I'm actually going to put darts in the front and the back. And when you do darts, you want 2 of them, or an even number. You want an even number of darts. In this case, in the front, we want 2 of them, and we want them equally spaced. So 10 would be the middle, so at 15 and at 5. But because that's not quite the way the body is shaped, we've got at some point it's going to be curving around, so we're not going to measure it that far out. We're going to bring it in to 13 and 7. That looks good. So that's going to be the center mark of our dart. An inch for each of the front darts. Because it's not an even number, it's going to be a little awkward. But let's do an inch width for both of these front darts. And what's going to happen is that is going to pull together like that and create a little sort of mini seam. That will be the dart. And it's going to take that much. It's going to, because these are an inch each, whenever I pull those in, that's going to take 2 whole inches out of the waistline of this garment. And I'll be doing the same thing again in the back. So what darts actually do, in addition to the side shaping, which creates a curve, the darts will pull in part of the fabric, but not all the fabric. When you create a seam, you shorten 2 pieces of fabric towards one another. Well, when you create a seam that's only part of the overall piece, you bring those 2 pieces together in one place, but not in another. which is how you get fitting mostly down through here, like for princess seams. And fitting in this area is not just for girls, it works for guys too, because it makes everything along the lower part of your torso, the waist, smaller, and allows the shoulders to stay nice and wide and expanded, which gives a decreasing or slimming sort of line, which is complementary to just about everybody. Because I want to make these darts about 6 inches long, because that's a good length. And they are going to curve back on themselves like that. That's roughly the shape of what we're going to be taking out. Now we have to fold the dart over its center line and then pin it along this curve, because that is where we're going to be stitching. And you've got to be very careful, make sure when you pick it up to do this that you have picked up only the front and not both, because you don't want to take your dart out of both the front and the back at the same time. You want it to only come out of one or the other, because if you try to take your dart out of the front and the back simultaneously, you will sew the front and back together and no longer have a wearable garment, and that will make you very unhappy. And do the same thing on the other one. All right, there we are. That's our front darts pinned and ready to sew. Here's our darts, and we tie the end of the strings, all the strings at the end of the darts, and what that does is reinforces the end of that little seam. And of course, trim all of your threads. Got them all stitched and finished, and the edges, the ends tied. Now what you want to do is come down this little seam and snip it the same way we do any curved line of stitching, because doing this is what will allow that fabric to bend and overlap itself so that it will actually follow this curve. We are moving on to the darts in the back, and really take the time to make sure that everything is laid out nice and flat and straight and tidy. And do you see how the edges are already starting to overlap right here? That fold has happened because we took the darts out of the front. So now the front is 2 inches narrower than the back. We are about to change that. The darts in the back are actually going to be bigger than the darts in the front. And there is a very good reason for this that I'm about to explain. The size of the dart, as in the width of the dart, is what determines how much fabric is taken out, which means how much the area we're looking at will constrict as compared to the other areas around it. The reason that it's good to have bigger darts in the back in some cases is if you've got more fabric that you want to leave behind, as that will still allow for room for your butt. I am putting these darts at 7 and 13 as well, the same sort of positioning as on the front, and I am taking the time to make sure that I stretch this to be certain that my measurements are accurate, because we have a size difference between front and back now. This is supposed to be a tunic, and I don't necessarily want it fitting like a glove, so I'm going to discount that little ½ inch, and I'm going to take 4 inches out. And what that does is it makes it nice and even and easy math for these two back darts. I can make them 2 inches wide each, and that's a whole lot easier than 2 inches and a quarter, which is just a nuisance. Now, because these are wider, we're going to make them a little bit longer. I think I'm going to make these about 9 inches. Sounds good? Now, when you start stitching these, especially if you have some of the paint on the back like this shirt does, you don't have to worry too much about stitching over this, take your time, be careful. It might be a little bit resistant to the needle, so go slowly. Don't try to breeze through it super fast, but the sewing machine will probably handle it without a problem. Just watch it and be careful. And there we are. Those are our back darts. Finished the same way the front ones were. I'm going to trim this out a little bit because there's an awful lot of fabric there that I'm just going to get out of the way so that it doesn't mess up my line. And I'm going to clip the curve. And this method that I have shown you with taking in the side seams and doing darts, you can use this to fit any garment, or just about any garment.
Here is our resized shirt. Now, it doesn't look like a whole lot at the moment, but once you put it on somebody, you can see how it will be fitting a whole lot better. We've got the waist taken in, we have got more shaping going on with it, and once it is put on, that shaping will become much more evident. Now, to draw some attention to the seams, I have not addressed the arm's eye seams, so you see they are still very messy, and I'm probably going to be doing something else with those in a later video. The shoulder seams, if you look, these are encased seams, so those are effectively finished. We really don't have to do anything with those. Now, the neckline you can either leave as is because it is properly closed in. Just make sure you trim off the tag because having a tag hanging out is a bit tacky, unless that's specifically what you want. Or you can change the neckline if you so choose. You can cut it out, leave it ragged, and have kind of that raggedy sort of look, which is good for some things. Or you can reface it and even have a slit coming down the front with maybe some ties. There's all sorts of stuff you can do with it from here. But that was just showing you how to make it fitted. And you don't have to use this technique just for costumes. You can use it for your regular clothes if you want your t-shirts to fit a bit better. Guys, if you want them to look like a muscle shirt. Or if you want your dress shirts or blouses to be a bit more tailored, you can use the same technique and it will work. Just make sure that your measurements are accurate and that you keep to them and mind your math. Those are the important parts. As long as you meet your measurements, it will fit you properly and it will look very nice. Thank you again for joining me for another episode of Level 2 Sewing. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful. We have had a suggestion to do an episode on troubleshooting with the sewing machine. I have talked about the sewing machine. I have given a basic introduction to the sewing machine, and I answered some of Frank's questions about the sewing machine, but I've had somebody suggest going over some of the problems that you can run into with a sewing machine and how to fix them. Let me know in the comments if you like that idea, if that's something that would be helpful to you. And again, you can let us know on the comments of this video, on the comments of other videos. Get in touch with us on Facebook, tell us what you'd like to see, or even on Instagram. We're all over the place. Find us anywhere and let us know what you want. Make sure you follow the link below and check out some of our merchandise on Redbubble. We've got merchandise for Devil May Care as well as for some of the projects that we have coming up, like The Crow Redemption, which is going to be awesome. And go check out that Facebook page if you haven't yet. They're working on all sorts of fun stuff with that. It's going to be amazing. And like, subscribe, make sure you let us know that you like what we're doing so that we have a reason to keep doing it. Please share us with your friends if you have any that you think might benefit from any of my videos or the devil himself's videos, because he did do several wonderful makeup tutorials. I think he's got some latex tutorials in the works that he's going to be releasing at some point. So be on the lookout for that. We're doing all sorts of wonderful stuff. Make sure you subscribe and keep up with us so that you know what we're up to at any given point in time. And I will see you next time.